I'm Alexander Rödlach, the Program Director of the Medical Anthropology Graduate Program at Creighton University. And I'm here today with Dr. Roos Willems from the University of Antwerp in Belgium. She is an anthropologist with a business background, but I think it's better if she introduces herself. Roos, thank you very much for being here and talking with me about what you're doing as an anthropologist at the University of Antwerp, but maybe you can explain to us your background.
Thank you very much, Alex, for inviting me and giving me an opportunity to talk about the project, which we will come to later. So yes, I have been working at the University of Antwerp for about 4 years now. But before, I worked for many years for the United Nations. Some of the agencies like the UNHCR and the IOM with refugees and migrants, which actually was in between my master's degree in economics and my PhD in anthropology. Right, so that is, and I also before that I worked for 5 years in the private sector in Belgium as an economist, so there is my background.
So you integrate skills and expertise in economics and also practical experience applying your economic expertise, and when you integrate it with the skills you gained during your anthropology training.
That's right. Both my anthropology training and I should say maybe my professional experience in the multicultural environment were very useful in now coordinating the EUMAGINE project, which was it is finished now. It was a 3-year project with 8 partner institutions in 7 European countries, and having to work with people coming from different backgrounds and different cultures. My previous experience and my anthropology training came in very useful.
Mm-hmm. Could you briefly explain to the viewers and to me the purpose and the goal of the EUMAGINE project?
Yes, it's like an acronym for imagining Europe from the outside. So the EU stands for Europe, and then the MAGINE comes from imagine. So maybe that's an easy way of remembering. It's so, yes, the project itself looked at the role of perceptions on human rights and democracy in the migration aspirations and eventually migration decisions. So it had 4 research countries. We did field research in Ukraine, Senegal, Morocco and Turkey, which all 4 are very important emigration countries with a lot of migration going to Europe in the past and the present, but they are also important transit countries. So people coming from other countries will first go to those 4 countries before making the final move to Europe. Mm-hmm. So that is the rationale, let's say, behind the choice of the 4 field sites. The rationale behind the choice of the focus, let's say, is that in migration studies, traditionally there has been a lot of focus just on economic disparities in between the countries of emigration and countries of migration. So we wanted to add something extra to that, more of coming from a sociocultural perspective, let's say, and add not only the fact that perceptions play a role, but also the perceptions not only on the economic disparities or realities, but also perceptions on human rights and democracy. And within the project, human rights was defined in the broadest sense. So not only political rights, because often human rights and democracy, it's just linked in a very narrow way with the right to vote, the right to demonstrate, freedom of opinion, freedom for political parties. That was one aspect of human rights that we took into account, but we also added, the more elaborate definition of the I think it's the United Nations Declaration for Human Rights of 1948. So the right to socio-cultural expression, the right to decent health care, the right to good education, and so forth. So within the project, we used a very broad definition of human rights and deconstructed it into a large number of questions in the survey in order to be able afterwards to see what is the impact of the perceptions of these different issues or these different situations, let's say, in the own country and in Europe on the migration aspirations of men and women between 18 and 39 years old. That was our research population.
Very good. You just mentioned you did survey research in these 4 countries. Could you briefly explain the methodology the researchers applied during this project?
Yes. First of all, like I said, there were 8 partners in this project in 7 countries. The University of Antwerp was the coordinator. But in order to make the research more efficient, we divided ourselves into 4 geographical duo teams, which means, for example, that the University of Antwerp and Koç University in Turkey worked very closely together to do the research, the field research in Turkey in the 4 research areas and doing the survey and the qualitative interviewing together. And so the same, the Compass Institute from the University of Oxford, they worked together with the Center for Sociological Research in Ukraine and did the research, the field research and the data collection in Ukraine. For Morocco, it was the Université Mohammed V, who collaborated closely with IMI, the International Migration Institute, also from the University of Oxford. And then in Senegal, the partners of the Université Cheikh Anta Diop, based in Dakar, who worked closely with the Peace Research Institute, PRIO in Norway. So that's how then we had 4 teams, each concentrating on one of the research countries. For methods, yes, we had an elaborate survey, questionnaire, let's say, which we tested first in the 2 pilot phases to make sure that it was a workable instrument. And in each country, 2,000 persons, men and women, of between the ages 18 to 39 were surveyed. So this was a lot of work, as you can imagine, especially since we concentrated on 4 research areas in each country. 4 research areas, being one with a high emigration ratio, another one which was socio-economically of the same standard of living, but with a low emigration ratio, then a third research area where we had a high immigration, like I said, because these 4 countries were important transit countries, so there were areas with high immigration. And then the 4th one was a region with human rights issues. Now, in some of the countries, this was like a political human rights issue. For example, in Turkey, we chose the Kurdish region. In other countries, the emphasis was not so much on political rights as more on socioeconomic rights. So the human rights area was an area that had been maybe neglected in government policies, economic development, etc. So in each of those 4 research areas, we sampled 500 persons in a representative manner. So, and because some of the areas were very rural, with very small villages, so it was quite a challenge, because the survey the sampling strategy had to be applicable both in these rural areas as well as in, for example, Kiev or Tanger, the capitals of 2 of the countries. So already some anthropological expertise came in handy there to make sure that the surveyors, so the persons who actually went into the field to do this, to administer the survey to the research population, that they all had the same interpretation and the same understanding of the sampling strategy, but also of the questionnaire and the questions and the concepts within the questionnaire. So that was, it took quite a bit of preparation.
And we as anthropologists, we know that sometimes a literal translation doesn't necessarily mean that people understand the concepts. The way of asking questions is culturally informed, so it's not so easy to administer in different cultural settings the same survey questionnaire. It may introduce a lot of bias if we don't consider the socio-cultural factors which are important for asking questions and formulating and phrasing questions. No?
Absolutely, absolutely. It was quite a challenge. And maybe everything did not go in a perfect manner, but that's how these things go.
Research is only as good as it gets. We try our best and we highlight shortcomings and possible limitations. There's no perfect research, but I guess a large team like yours, an interdisciplinary research team, really minimized bias. Now, another question I have, and it's maybe difficult for you to answer for such an extensive long-term project. Can you summarize the findings or some of the findings you had after completing the data analysis and interpretations? So what are some of the major findings? You can't highlight everything, and our viewers can also go to the website of the EUMAGINE project, and I think some research publications are also listed there. But what are the main findings of your study?
Okay, before going to the findings, maybe there was something else I forgot to mention on the methodology. Indeed, as you said, there was a large team. It was more than 35 researchers from these countries, and that is not including the people who went into the field and administered the survey. The 35 are really all academic researchers affiliated to the 8 research institutions that I mentioned before. And secondly, also, in addition to the survey, because the survey was just to collect quantitative data, in addition to the survey, we also had qualitative data collection through interviewing. So in each of the 16 research areas that I mentioned before, 4 research areas in 4 countries, we select, and these qualitative data were collected by the researchers themselves. So that was not subcontracted to surveyors. Parties of maybe 2 or 3 researchers from the geographical duo teams, they had to go to each research area for at least 2 to 3 weeks and do some observation. And then within this period, select about 20 informants of different backgrounds, so men and women, different ages, people of different socioeconomic status, people with migration aspirations as well as people without migration aspirations. And they were interviewed using a topic list which had been discussed before by the whole consortium of the partners. So this means that at the end we had a large quantitative and qualitative database.
That's actually ideal in research, to integrate these both methodologies, the qualitative methods with the quantitative methods, because numbers very often from quantitative research don't say much. You need also the qualitative research data to make sense of the quantitative numerical data. And when you design a survey questionnaire without considering the qualitative observation and an interview and other text data, very often the questions are not appropriate. So it's the integration of both methodologies actually is ideal.
Right. Yes. So that is why, of course, we had this combination on top of, well, the collection of the primary data came in addition, of course, to a literature study which had been done on using secondary data, because we did, well, each of the geographical duo teams did an extensive background study at the country level and at the research area level first, before even going into the designing of the survey and the topic guide for the interviewing. So yes, we did a lot of data collection. Now we come to the analysis of the data that we collected, and of course it's gigantic. I'll just mention a couple of things. Because the main focus was on migration aspirations, we found that in different countries, there was a different percentage of people who aspired to migrate. We found that in Senegal, it was the highest, up to, when looking at men and women separately, up to 80% of the respondents surveyed, of the male respondents surveyed, said they had migration aspirations, which is gigantic. Whereas, for example, in Turkey was the country where we had the lowest percentage of people with migration aspirations, and there only 30% of the women said that if they had the opportunity, they would like to migrate within the next 5 years. That was the survey question that measured the migration aspirations. We linked this in the first place, of course, with the at the macro level, with the general economic situation of these countries. Senegal is the country with the lowest income per capita and also the lowest human development indicator, whereas Turkey has known a tremendous economic development over the past 10 to 15 years. And actually, when looking at the migration statistics, you can see that Turkey has become an immigrant country rather than an immigration country. So, yes, very interesting. And then Morocco and Ukraine were somewhere in between those two extremes with regard to migration aspirations. I must emphasize again, this is just a part of the population in between 18 and 39 years old. So then in the second stage, of course, we looked at what were the factors that influenced these migration aspirations, apart from the economic situation at the macro level. At the meso level, to use a bit of a technical term, we also looked at the influence of transnational networks, and we found indeed that those persons who had larger transnational networks were more inclined to have migration aspirations than others, which is kind of an evidence. We found the same effect in the 4 countries. And then lastly, at the micro level, at the individual level, there were of course the socio-demographics. So a man is more inclined to have migration aspirations than a woman. A person who is not married will be more likely to have migration aspirations than somebody who's married. Also, age plays a role. Younger people are more inclined to have migration aspirations than older people. What else was there? The education level played a role, although it was not so, the impact, let's say, of the education level was not unambiguous because, and not linear. That is to say that people with the lowest education and with the highest education level were less inclined to have migration aspirations than people with an average level of education.
Interesting.
And then, oh yes, we had one more factor, which was we had an index to measure material wealth. There as well, the effect was not really linear. It just depends, and also different from country to country. And then we come to the very focus of the research project, which was to look at the impact of perceptions on human rights and democracy on the formation of migration aspirations. And there we found a statistically significant effect of the having of positive perceptions on the human rights situation in Europe on migration aspirations. So what does this mean? That a person in each of the 4 countries who had positive perceptions of the human rights situation, and like I said before, the human rights taken in the broadest sense, so which included then access to a good education, the perception on the quality of healthcare, also on the gender equity, gender relations. Also, we had questions on the poverty reduction policies, on corruption, on job opportunities, and so forth. So a person, so we constructed a variable, let's say, that took into account all these issues. and then a person, man or a woman, who had the positive perceptions of the situation of all those 4 issues in Europe was more inclined to have migration aspirations than a person who did not have these positive perceptions, who had more negative perceptions. That was the factor with the most influence. Secondly, also having negative perceptions on those items, on those situations in the own country, was also impacting on the having of migration aspirations. And then, but less so than the positive perceptions on situation in Europe. And then in the third place, we had the people who had negative perceptions on job opportunities, on the economic situation in the own country, were also more inclined to have migration aspirations, but not to the same extent than the perceptions on the situation of the human rights, which was a very interesting finding to us, and it actually proved the point. The assumption, well, let's say the research hypothesis that we started with, namely that perceptions on human rights and democracy not only play a role in the formation of migration, in the construction of migration aspirations, but actually play in the 16 research countries of the 4 countries that we researched, and among the population that we researched, played a more significant role than the economic opportunities.
Interesting. That's a fascinating finding. Now, since our viewers are anthropologists and medical anthropologists, did you also see some association between aspirations to migrate and health and healthcare issues? Is there something in your data in this line?
Yes, absolutely. Like I said, the more global results. For the more global results, we used a variable that combined all these different issues. But if we look at the question of the perceptions on healthcare separately, and then also we see an effect, a statistically significant effect of the perceptions on the quality of and the access to healthcare in the own country and in Europe on migration aspirations. And I can even give you some percentages. For example, in Ukraine, that was the most striking. A person in Ukraine who has negative perceptions on the access to and the quality of healthcare services in his own country will be is more likely to have migration aspirations by 54% than somebody who does not have these negative perceptions on the situation in the own country. We found for Turkey it was a difference of 20%. And then with regard to, so this was for people having negative perceptions on the health, so people that were not satisfied with the healthcare system in their own country. And then persons who had positive perceptions on the healthcare system in Europe, they were also more inclined to have migration aspirations. And in Morocco, the probability for such a person to have migration aspirations increased by 24%, in Turkey by 21%, and in Ukraine by 14%. So, except in Senegal there was no significant effect of the perceptions on healthcare either in the own country or in Europe on migration aspirations. So that was also, yes, we have not found, how should we say, why yet. So that's actually, we as anthropologists, we're more interested in the why than in just noticing that there is this or that effect.
You want to explain why something is as it is.
Yes. So we have not gotten to that, but we found, so in Senegal there is no effect, but in the different countries there is an effect either from having negative perceptions on the healthcare system in the own country or having positive perceptions of the healthcare system in Europe. They do play a role in the formation of migration aspirations.
Fascinating. Well, what if another question regarding your research team and the project as such? You are part of a project as an anthropologist, where other researchers with other academic, disciplinary backgrounds. But I guess our viewers would be interested, as they are anthropology students or interested in anthropology and maybe learning more about anthropology, if you would be interested perhaps in what kind of skill set is important to develop to be part of such projects. So what did you find as an anthropologist as very valuable for what you were doing and also maybe for other positions in the whole EUMAGINE project?
Yes, there's several aspects to this question. First, as a coordinator, because I was responsible for coordinating the activities among the 8 partner institutions, whom all had different backgrounds, not only different disciplinary backgrounds, but also different cultural backgrounds. They came from different research traditions because, again, each country, also each research institution had their own way of doing things. And we tried, as the coordinator, to have as much participation in the designing and the developing of instruments and strategies as possible. And that was quite a challenge. We met like once or twice a year, the whole consortium, in order to discuss the next steps in the implementation of the project. And even though there is, for these European funded projects, there is a large document which is called the description of work, which already has a lot of details in it, being the description of work, evidently. But once you get to really, preparing people to go into the field and do the collecting and the analysis of the data, then you see that even though you have one document, you will have so many different interpretations of what is written in the document or the methods than there are people. So that's why these meetings, although they're very costly and very time-consuming, but they are useful. You have to have them because they save a lot of time afterwards. Because if you don't have these meetings and you don't discuss really step by step that this is how we're going to do things, and when such a situation comes, then this is how we are going to deal with it, you could end up with, how should I say, very different data from the 4 countries, and there's 16 research areas, which then may turn out not to be comparable at all. And so which actually that would beat the purpose of the project.
Since you're an anthropologist, was this part of a decision to make you the program coordinator? Because as an anthropologist you're used to observe, you're used to intercultural research, so you're more likely maybe than someone else of not with cross-cultural experience to understand people of another cultural background. So for harmonious working together and maybe identifying and addressing problems due to cultural differences, you would be, as an anthropologist, the right person. Is this?
I think so, because as anthropologists we learn also observation methods. And this is extremely important. Why? Because you could have a discussion, perhaps I'm just in the consortium meeting and I'm observing a discussion between 2 researchers from 2 different countries. And as an anthropologist, and also having had 15 years of experience working in other countries, mainly in Africa, you see where people come from. So maybe they would say A and B, but you as an anthropologist, you think further and you say, why are they saying A and B? And why? What is the logic behind their arguments? Because it's only by going through the logic behind the arguments that you can try to bring their points of view together and to find common ground and to see that one is actually understanding what the other one is saying, and not just having a discussion on technical details, perhaps, which are just at the very superficial level.
So like a culture broker.
Yes, indeed. That's a good way of saying that. And I found it very useful, very helpful. And also through approaching, let's say, the discussions or the disagreements that way, you can actually add some respect or maybe to show other people to have more respect for the position of the other person by going more into the background the reason why this other person is using this and this argument, that it does have a logic behind it. There is a cultural logic or an economic logic behind it, and it's not just so. Because the danger with these, let's say, multicultural projects or intercultural projects is that when there is not enough understanding of the background of where the other research institute is coming from, it also may lead to lack of respect. Mm-hmm. And once you go down that path, then really the whole consortium becomes unmanageable. Mm-hmm. So it is really quite a challenge. Mm-hmm. It was quite a challenge, but extremely interesting, and I would do it again if given the next opportunity.
So besides the observational and analytical skills, did you find some other anthropological skills useful in this project? Maybe not necessarily in what you did, but what other researchers did. Was there something else which you found valuable?
Well, the knowledge of more languages, of course, because the saying goes that the language is the vehicle of culture. So if you know more than one language, you're also probably more likely to be open to different points of view. So knowledge of language I find very important. Actually, even though the let's say the working language of the project was English, we did not have one single native English speaker. And even the persons, the researchers from Oxford, they were not native British, they were Dutch and German. So in that sense, that was a good combination of people. Well, sometimes it was difficult to for the conversation, especially because some the researchers from the Senegalese and the Moroccan institutes, their English was maybe not of the same level as the English of the others. So that was another challenge. There were a lot of challenges in this project. Yes, so language, being open, and I think listening skills. Listening skills are the most important in not only from the as a coordinator towards the research partners, but also that includes for all the researchers that went into the field and collected the data from men and women who may not use the term human rights in their day-to-day conversation. So that was another challenge to how to deconstruct the concept to make it more understandable to just men and women in the street.
And sometimes you may think that listening skills are just general human skills, but in anthropology we systematically learn, we are trained into listening well and then explaining what people said and why they said it by looking at the wider social and cultural context. So it's beyond just listening skills like a counselor does who needs to listen to a client. Roos, thank you very much for this interesting conversation and touching also on how anthropology and social science skills have been extremely important for this EUMAGINE project. I think our viewers can also Google the EUMAGINE project and find more about this project online and what you are doing. Thanks also for your time to come to the Creighton campus. You are busy, but we very much appreciate that you came and took the time. And viewers, so thank you very much for viewing. I hope this conversation gave you some idea about anthropology, its usefulness, how it contributes to research projects. And it may also give you some idea about what you would like to do with your life and what kind of education and training you would like to obtain in the next years. So thank you very much for watching.
Thank you very much, Alex, for inviting me and giving me the opportunity to talk on the EUMAGINE project. And I hope when you visit the website, you will find it as interesting and fascinating as we did. Thank you very much.